That's new.
Official.
Yeah, official, official recording. All right. And then Teri-Lee, I'll look at the a little bit deeper into the Zoom thing to get the background on.
Okay. Yeah, I've got it saved down now, so I just got to figure out how to load it up there. We'll be good to go.
Okay, cool.
You know who took that profile picture?
Who?
Bill Hunt.
The Bill Hunt?
Yeah.
The one that didn't bring you on as a guest, right?
Right, the one couldn't figure out how to bring you on as a guest. That's
it's so rude.
That guy, I'll tell you.
I know. Fine, it's fine.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask if he was gonna join.
He probably won't. He probably won't. He'll be like, well, I talk to you all the time. Okay.
I'll text him. Make sure he's probably just ignore me.
Yeah. He answers in his own time.
Right. We can at least get him to ask some questions. He's always good for some form of modernization question.
I got very good at defending my answers because Bill will come at me if I'm wrong.
Yes, he's happy to have a debate.
No, you're only as strong as your teachers, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, and he's definitely is a good one for conversation. I think that was the problem he and I had on here, was making sure we didn't talk over each other. We had Teri-Lee on as a guest. I think we almost ran out of time, I think, between the three of us.
And that's where the joke started about me co-hosting, right?
Right, exactly. Jokes turn to reality.
I know. Careful.
It happens. All right, we got 2 minutes left. For those that are joining, we will be starting at 9 a.m. exactly. So just hang out, please.
Or get your coffees.
Right, exactly.
Right? There you go. Coffees, plural.
We need plural.
I wanted to go off camera to clear out my sinuses. Oh.
Yes, the joy of the fall.
Yeah.
Area. Luckily, I thought my daughter moving to Denver would lose the allergy problem, but now she's just got the dry air problem. So she's working through that. But all right, we've hit 9 o'clock. We've got folks joining in, but let's go ahead and get started. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second season kickoff of the ATARC Cloud and Coffee. This is the place for discussions on all things modernization and transformation. My name is Chris Oglesby with MorphWorks, and my new co-host for the second season, Teri-Lee Holland. Teri-Lee.
Good morning, everybody. Teri-Lee Holland here with Nywick Atlantic. Looking forward to talking with everybody today.
So again, before the introduction, the platform is hosted under the ATARC Cloud and Infrastructure pillar with the goal of bringing lessons learned and ideas to the ATARC community. Our focus will be a conversation about our guests' experiences, past and present, executing modernization and transformation efforts. For those of you that are on attending, there is a Q&A button for questions at the bottom of your Zoom. Please click that button and we will get to the questions as we move through the discussion. So now let's move on to introductions. Today our guest is Charlotte Lee, one of the leading experts of UX and CX in the federal government. Charlotte, would you mind sharing with the audience a little bit about your background?
Yes, so I'm Charlotte, and I started in government IT by the ways of going into acquisitions. So I'm very FAR friendly. And a few months after realizing that I didn't want to do acquisitions, I was very into looking for a way into government innovation more directly. And so I pivoted and started a new company called Castling Group at that time in 2012 or 13. And I've been an independent consultant since then of user experience. I don't know if you wanted a professional background, but I'm from Virginia, Fairfax, and went to school at UVA, so very Virginian, and all paths lead to DC. And so I've been doing government UX and CX for the last 10 years on various modernization projects.
Excellent, excellent, thank you. So I want to hit you with something that we finished with when we did our little prep meeting. One of the things that you talked about was your thoughts around needing to change the language that we're using around modernization. And so would like to start with that as we get into our overarching conversation.
Yeah, I think the word legacy, for example, all these things are antithetical to innovation because it assumes that there's this end point in which like something is new and then we need to replace it versus a cycle of iterative innovation. And also, as soon as you deploy something, it becomes legacy. And so then we, treat software as if like some things are new and some things are old, when in truth, most of the very powerful and substantial programs are going to be in COBOL because it can't be replaced, because it's so good and precise, and because nobody has thought of a way to truly like offload, right? So I just think that the word around like modernization and legacy systems, like that kind of stuff can be really hindering to the culture of software technology and government.
So the concept of legacy, right? Obviously, people looking to take their old systems to something new. How does that tie into your expertise around UX and CX? Right.
So I guess one of the earliest starts of that was when I was at CBP and we were working on the ACE modernization project. And that's like a big project that like so many people have like gone through. It's almost like a club that you get initiated into, I guess. And so they had trouble taking this off of legacy system for various reasons. And much like all IT on like modernization projects, it was definitely not a technology problem. It was a people and process. It was a matter of stakeholder engagement. It was a matter of, alignment, of agility, like all sorts of things that really hindered innovation was what was really causing the IT legacy modernization effort to slow down. So what happened was I brought in user experience in the guise of business analysis, right? So they're like, okay, well, we have business analysts and then we're going to do UX, right? So then that seemed like an easy pivot. And when you do UX, you get a lot of built-in design thinking, which starts with empathy, right? So there's this time of empathy, empathizing. I'm really meeting them where they are, which is exhausted, right? So it's been like 20 years. They've had several contractors come in, and the empathy that I gained out of it is they're exhausted. They don't like you. Don't take it personally. This is, you got to think from their perspective. So using that kind of user experience, human-centered design thinking methodology, I was able to kind of corral the stakeholders into energizing one more time by meeting them where they were, like actually going to the airport, which is all part of the ethnographic research of user experience design, right? So in that face-to-face contact, that, you know, understanding the user's problem in a human-centric way was definitely a different way than like, you know, requirements meetings, or like, can we have these legacy documents? It's much more personable. So I think that methodology followed the process or the work product. That was quintessential.
Everything that you're saying, Charlotte, just really hits home for me. You know, to stop using like the legacy terms and stuff. And one of the things that you shared in our prep meeting also was not just the lessons learned, but how do we close that gap from where you are on the industry side to say where I am on the government side? Like, how do we start working together? You know, does that mean changing language, scope of contracts? If you could talk a little bit more about that too, I think that was really hit home for me.
Okay. I'm trying to recall what I said last time, but also just to like answer the question at hand. Yeah, I think that there is a cultural aspect to it, right? There is this problem with methods and frameworks before people. So in this, we do this weird circuitous thing where we point at each other, like the Spider-Man meme, like you have to do the thing. Like we can't be agile because we're, you know, not, versus, you know, whatever. But one of the things is to like bridge the gap between like the culture, the reality versus, you know, like what can happen, like what will happen. So one of the things I think I said was, before starting a legacy project, for leadership themselves to come down and, you know, kind of like nudge or inspire that this is not a effort of disengagement or dismantlement of the systems, but to have that stakeholder like buy-in for the contractors, right? Because as a contractor, I felt so powerless. I've, you know, never been a Fed. So I always feel really powerless when leadership isn't behind you, right? And to corral that effort culturally is so important. There is a leadership gap. I think that's what we talked about between like, you know, inspirational versus like management, right? Like there is a sense of like emotional hostility in exchange when we do legacy modernization, which is that language part too, right? Like when you call some person's program legacy that we must, you know, modernize, that is offensive, right? Like if you think about it. So I'd love to see that leadership, that language, that cultural thing happen as a framework before you bring in the RFIs and the RFPs, because that team isn't ready. And when leadership gets that team ready, it's a big difference, right? Like, hey guys, we want to do these things. We want to achieve this. This is my plan. This is our vision. This is where we want to go. This is what people will want to do. And that's the second problem thing, is change management, which is something people are really familiar with. It's so much more. It's like 80% change management, and then you can do a lot of tech real fast. But it's because we just draw it out with these people like issues and combativeness and defensiveness and contractors are totally powerless to change that, right? So between federal and contracting personnel who work on legacy, leadership is a huge gap that is unfortunately there.
So are you saying that when you go in, that you start with kind of a people and process approach of what the ultimate goal is, and then bring in the technology after?
Yes, absolutely. And it's in design thinking, we have 5 steps, right? So wherever you are, I walk in. I always say I made a lot of money on like 5 basic questions: is who, what, where, when, why, and then the design thinking methodology. Those are my 2 frameworks. This is all I do. Empathize, right? And really empathize with the employees, the front line, the staff, like the, you know, support and leadership, really empathizing all your stakeholders. And then we do defining activities, right? So people don't agree on the requirements. And that is like, hands on every project, for some reason, the requirements are not defined. So, and then, and then we go on to ideate the solution together. And then here's where we fail is the prototyping phase, right? Where there is no leadership culture in government to properly prototype, which is leadership saying, go ahead and make that mistake, right? And we will back you. And then the iterative innovation happens when you test. And that test takes you back to number one is empathize, right? Which is that user testing that you do, or the feedback that you get is you made a whole loop around, and that requires a lot of people facilitation throughout.
Yeah, I love that we're discussing not the technology. We are discussing the people part of this, right? And we always go in with the technology piece. And one of the other things that we had talked about too, when we were talking about how we close that gap is, scoping down the contracts that are out there so that we are really focused. And, where that's made a difference. If you want to talk a little bit about that, I think that would be great to hear as well.
Right. We had talked about the shift from MVPs, minimally viable products, to minimally marketable products. Yes, that's definitely along the lines of a small acronym change that is everything. A lot of times when we do get the privilege of an exploratory discovery project or a prototyping project, we go for the MVP. Let's show them the whole shebang so we can sell them on everything down the line in 10 years. And if you do all of this, then you can have this thing that doesn't work that you can click around in and you can show, stakeholders. And there's this inherent culture of risk aversion in government, right? Where we want to see exactly where everything is, which is inherently not agile. So then we plan everything out. And then in this MVP, we give them things that don't work, that have fake buttons, that has not been analyzed, right? And then we never do it because it's impossible. And now we're also overwhelmed, where we're like, this is what, 20 million, whatever. So then you get lots of money spent on just these prototypes of minimally viable things hey, it's viable. Of course it's viable. Everything is viable if you want it to be. But the minimally marketable product is an insistence that the thing that you do completes one thing perfectly within a longer process, right? So if you're going to make a return system or a point of sale system, which is how I described the ACE project, right? Do the check processing perfectly, or do the, reporting properly, just that one nugget, and then start expanding the scope from there instead of here is everything. You might be able to press this one day, and in one day there might be this drop down, and that is where money is just totally splashed. And I don't know if that's a matter of smaller scoping because of the intensive cost of acquisitions, or if it's the way that we approach projects at large can change to make room for that ideation, prototyping. At the same time, you demand a product that works. So I think government can come down on industry a little bit harder to say, give us something that works, that completes something fully. Don't give us fake things. Don't give us fake, buttons. Give us something that does it completely, and we'll talk about the next thing that we can do on top of it. That's my opinion, though.
So no. That's what this is about, right? Giving thoughts and ideas to people that may be working through these items. But so we talk a lot about the challenges that come up, but I think you've gone into programs that were challenged for many years, right? From kind of the large big bang, we're gonna do this modernization effort to make those small impacts, right? So I think organizations as well as companies get themselves into these procurements that might have taken, by the time you actually got the, did the RFI, got the RFP out, actually got it awarded, maybe go through protest. Now you're 4 years, 5 years from, time of kind of starting. You've kind of gone into some of those programs like that to help. And I guess, how have you seen, we talked to at MorphWorks, the emotional side of change, but how have you seen that, I'm trying to think of the politically correct way of going in and basically disrupting the apple cart a little bit, right? Because you do come into these large contracts to make actually big impact. And so how does that work both for the contractor and what you've seen from both sides?
I think I told you in our rehearsal that people just don't like me. Like I just have to deal with it, right? And I
was trying not to go that far.
It's true. It's true. It's true.
I don't believe it.
It's met with a lot of animosity. I sometimes think that I've been hired to take that blame, and so I will do it with expectations at large. Like I go in thinking like so-and-so executive, so-and-so project program brought me in because there's something wrong, and they'd like for someone else to tell them, like not themselves, what's wrong, right? So it feels, but now I realize it's pattern. So I did trademark a SWAT team, technology SWAT team. So no one can use it for money, but whatever. That's a different point. But that's how I felt.
There's royalties.
Yeah, there's royalties. Anyone uses technology SWAT team, you let me know. You'll get a share of it. But that's the feeling, is that I'm coming in and they're not going to like me and I'm going to get assaulted. But I just start at a place of empathy. Like it's the least and most I can do, right? Is I understand like this is what's going on. I see these are the merits and here is the road work to get out of it. And that's my simple answer. I go in and I am in a hazmat suit and helmets, and I need a lot of top cover whenever I do go in, especially with the CX thing that touches organizations across. So there's no easy answer. I just get kind of like abused in a sense.
All right. Yeah. So we actually have a question here from our mutual friend, Bill Hunt. Bill, thank you for joining, our co-host from season 1. Hi, Charlotte. What should government be doing, particularly when creating new contracts, to ensure that the solutions we're getting vendors to build actually solve the problems for the public and not just adding shining new KPIs?
Well, I think this goes back to the minimally marketable product bill. It's that the first milestones after your discovery phase and the requirements phase. So not ignoring big requirement things. So there's a lot of like things that happen when you say you do agile, is not documenting or like not doing the requirements ahead of time, but there does need to be a time of discovery and like scoping, right? So I do wish that before procurement goes out, that there was a much more due diligence about procurement of said technologies. I know that Gartner's in that space, right? Like looking into the solutions that are possible. So you're closer to where you are, but not prescriptive. So it'd be nice if there was time on the federal side to like buffer that before an RFI goes out even, right? Because I think the RFI can be sometimes like so detailed that you're like, you know exactly what you want versus like, what is this nebulous thing? So just closing the gap between like, I have no idea versus I know exactly what we want and we're just pretending to care. Like, so there's closing that earlier gap. And then there's that insistence on the minimally marketable product. Like, instead of saying like, these are the requirements that we want, we need to start talking about the goal. Like our ability to process 10,000 returns a year or something, like something that is measurable, and then having the components broken down where it's like, okay, in order to make that 10,000 returns possible, first we must do this. And that first thing we do should be the milestone rather than give us a refund system. So narrowing the scope, understanding the technology better before soliciting industry is a team effort, I think. Does that answer the question, or he's going to yell at me after the show? Like, this is actually, not correct.
This is the first time actually Bill's been quiet. So
and he says, yep, thanks. So I think you're good. You got it.
Okay.
I was going to say, Charlotte, we had talked through an example before, and I think using the point of sale system, like you outlined what that MMP would be, and you gave us a really good example of it. Can you share that? Because I think like even just getting to that point and understanding that, there's even still confusion of if we were to ask for this or we were to see this, then we can start bringing in the other pieces. I think it's great to hear those examples.
Was this in context of the congressional project?
I think it was how you started with a small piece of it, and then to show that this is what, we're capable of doing. I'm not looking to change everything right away.
Right. So in Congress, I have the absolute pleasure of working with visionaries. I mean, they are the most amazing clients I've ever had. If Congress needs your help, please, like send help that way. But one of the things is that when I first started on the comparative print project, the vision itself was Congress members don't know what they're voting on. They don't understand this information. So in typical government fashion, they passed a rules change to say, we need a report that shows how bills change current law. And that's very prescriptive, right? Like from Congress members don't know to like show us how a bill changes law, right? So there's this kind of jump that you have to do with achieving the vision. And so when I came in, they had made this natural language processor that looked really ugly and was like, do your human thing and like make it so people will use it. That was the vague assignment around it, right? So then I'm looking at this and then, right, it's very vague, right? Like, so then they're like, look at this thing. I look at it and I'm like, oh my God, this NLP is so powerful. It can actually achieve the vision of Congress members knowing and understanding like what is happening other than this piece of software. But this piece of software is the most important thing. So we really honed in on the user's personas. We did user research. We had focus groups. We had like naming parties. With like attorneys and congressional staff. Bill came to one once, and we made this thing that did how a bill changes current law. But with that blueprint, we were able to make everything else. And now we have something called the comparative suite of softwares where you can see how a bill changes, a bill is different from another bill, how amendments impact legislation, how to read a bill in an intellectual way. So we like use the same NLP technology. So cost nothing to like marginally less to build, on top of what we have, right? And it just snowballed into a comprehensive suite within no time because we addressed the vision itself with a product that like takes you a step closer. And we could have stopped right there. We really like, that was the assignment. And then when people saw it, then we used design thinking and re-looped it. Okay, now that we can see that, what are other people's needs? Okay, like, hey, like so-and-so staffer, how would you use this? Well, we don't really do those kinds of comparisons. We do comparisons on amendments. Okay, like, can we make that happen? So using the same seed technology, it's a suite now, and it's going to be house-wide. I'm very excited about it, but start with that little seed project.
So I want to start with a basic. One of the things that you talk about is you moved from UX to CX, and so that we started with the basically the language needs to change, right? But what can you walk through? You got into UX, user experience, and moved to CX, customer experience. So what was that? What was the need, or what was the evolution that drove that?
Well, I have one name for you. It's Martha Doris, but I don't know if you know them, but she is the unofficial, queen of CX. But when she found me, I was doing UX, and it was all the same principles, but for a single system at a time. And she was like, Charlotte, you can do this exact thing, but for the end-to-end journey of the customer. And she was like, it's just to scale, right? Like, and for this, instead of mapping the user flow through one system, you have to think of the whole thing, the whole journey. So like the way that you receive passports, right? Like a user experience person is focused on designing that kiosk and designing that website and designing that form, right, in pieces. But CX is the overarching leadership behind the goal, which is I would like passports to be done within 30 days of application. That is a leadership vision and something that we can all march to the order of, right? Something tangible. And that was what Sonny Perdue did at USDA, or when he was in Georgia. He was like, DMV should be 15 minutes. That's a CX goal. A UX goal is users need to get there in 5 clicks or whatever, much more micro. It's way more fun at this point for me to do the CX part of it, working with leadership and executives to work on that vision. What is the experience you would like the overarching thing to be? So small difference, but major at the same time.
Right.
Yeah, that's, I feel like that is going to be such a change for us. You know, we've always, I think, been system focused the way you've described it and not necessarily customer focused. And, you know, I just go back to how do we close that gap? When, you know, when we're bringing in industry, how are we closing that gap? So we've talked about the scope, we've talked about, the different items that we can look at, but what do you see as like if those key factors that like we could focus on? Like we get leadership in, we change the scope, we add in lots of empathy. You know, what do you see next? You know, for us in this collaboration.
We're all going to have to look for that statement of work from the government that has empathy in it. I'm waiting to see that
one. There's several. You know, I might have answered this question differently when we rehearsed, but I do have an answer like in the macro sense. I went to Europe this summer and I was up in the mountains in Madeira and we were having a conversation with two college students from Amsterdam. And they were talking about things, and to typical fashion, I said, "What public services do you like?" Which is great small talk, right? So, and honest to God, these girls were so confused, not at the question, but why I would even ask that. Like, and I was like, "I'm just curious," and they're like, "We like all of it." Like, I couldn't think of, actually, we have this one thing, which is student loans. Yeah, they're kind of hard, like whatever. And then the next girl, one of the girls, looks at the other girl, goes, "Stop it! You're embarrassing us." Because in Amsterdam, we only pay 1,500 euros, which is like what, $3,000 American, and it's not that hard. And she was embarrassed because she heard on the news that, like, you know, students in America face all sorts of things. She goes, "But I have a better example. Town hall things like the DMV or whatever. You know, like applying for healthcare is really hard." And I was like, "Oh yeah, us too, right?" And she's like, "Yeah, but it's, you know, 90 euros a month and they give us 130 so we can pay for additional medical expenses." And then this girl said something to me that was so shifting. She goes, "Yeah, I feel like our government thinks about what we want and then makes it happen." Right? Like, which I don't think Americans can quite say, right? Because we have to do ROI justifications, right? Like we have to demonstrate to a board why we need to modernize something, and we need to have contractors on board to do those things. It's not a simple matter of this is what citizens want and deserve. Like, how do we make that happen within the budget? It's more like this is the policy and the budget, and, you know, and then we start like totally backwards. And so the citizen is the last person to achieve, like, you know, any effect from what we're doing. It's, you know, government people and government contractors, and it all trickles down. And then the last people we think about are the people who are like at the end receiving these services. And a lot of love is lost between that need and that program's execution. So,
but you know, that brings up you know, just a philosophical. I do think, you know, coming off and into, right, the pandemic, I think there were industries that were able to rapidly evolve, and I think those are the ones that you know, that did get to that, and so you know, it is interesting because I do think it, you know, the global pandemic did create some modernization in and of itself because of, back to the point, the CX, right? The customer experience not only needed to happen, but we as businesses and we as government agencies needed to figure out how to support and how to provide that, you know, that environment. And I guess, you know, my concern is how do we, I'm kind of curious, how do we hold on to that, right? How do we maintain that kind of energy around evolving to that customer experience? Because there were things that truly changed. I'm not just talking about work from home, but there were truly changed to a little bit different customer experience, and quite honestly, a better one.
Yes. One of the earliest things we discussed and during the pandemic was which agencies were equipped and ready. And it was always going to be the ones who were innovating before it was necessary. So the VA and the telemedicine and the they had all the groundwork and it flipped just like that when you needed it. I heard the phrase, don't let a good crisis go to waste, like more times than ever in my life. And also it's the first time in my life I can internalize what that means, right? Because like I feel like I'm old enough to know what that means. I'm like, and I wonder if that is the nature of things, right? Like we don't do things unless it's urgent. And the most we can do is constantly have foresight for the experience, because the experience is an anchor, right? Getting out of the DMV within 15 minutes, things should just be better. That is the anchor. How we do that with whatever technology, whether it's cloud computing or, AI or ML, it doesn't matter. But if we can anchor ourselves on a metric based on the customer's experience, then we will get there through crises, through different technologies and platforms of leadership, administrations, or political party changes. We just have to set a vision as a community and of leadership that is there no matter what, right? So whether there's a crisis or not, people should have accessibility to, telemedicine as a vet who lives in a remote area, whatever. So there's a lot of things. So I would say that obviously I can't tell the future. And my opinion is that we might need crises to like push us forward, because that's what innovation in government has been in America historically. But there's also this sense of, why don't we set our visions further into the future so that all of the things that we do can manifest in its time when it's ready, right? So the VA was a little ahead on that, right? Like the VA it's a good example of like the urgency having always been there for them, because like every day is like a crisis for them. So right. Like they've always been investing a lot of money in there, and then when it happened, it happened. So I don't know if that was sufficient, but that's how I see things.
That's good.
Yeah, I think it was a flip, right? It was a flip from like, we want to do these things to now we need to. And who was like further down that path from want to need? I feel like that's where we were, right. To Charlotte's point. And I think we started off a little earlier with talking about like change and, how we support the change. I think the crisis has also led us to supporting that change faster. That's been refreshing to see. I hope we can keep up with it. I hope we can push for more change at a faster pace now that I think we've proven that we can do it. Do you have any advice like for us that you might say this is what we should go for?
Well, I actually am curious, and I'll turn it back to you guys, right? So you talk a lot with Chris, especially for your last season, talking a lot about people with modernization, right? And every so often these bubbles get created, like blockchain or whatever, like whatever innovation is happening, right? What do you think that technologists can start becoming more human-centric soon, or will it always be that in government we lead with the thing that we want, blockchain, the use cases then follow to justify this block, right? So like I wonder when we can, if you see that pivot coming.
I'll let Teri-Lee start with that one.
Is that audience members? Anyone?
I've got the long-term government contractor opinion.
Oh, let's see. Okay, so I think the question was, do we see the pivot coming?
Yeah.
I think we see it coming, but like we were talking about earlier about like policy and all of those things, there's still such a lag time to support that pivot. For me, you call it bubbles, I call it buzzwords, right? Like we target a buzzword, and we have a tendency to target it with the technology to solve the buzzword, and not necessarily what I think you keep pointing us back to, which is that culture change. And just, I think, my understanding and like what I've like researched about culture change is even asking the simple question, how do we measure culture change to say like we are changing our culture so that we can make that pivot? It's so hard to do. And now you place that on top of the government, and it's such a large entity to see that change in. But I think the positive is we're seeing it in, they might be small pockets pivoting, but more of the small pockets. And so it's more like an organic growth or an organic pivot that's building up. And that is refreshing. I mean, we have, like you were saying, like there's going to be a change in administration. There's, change in leadership. It's always happening. But I believe that the leaders that we have coming up have that mentality, and that's really where the pivot's going to happen from what I'm seeing. And we're starting to see it more and more.
Yeah. So from the contractor, the old GovCon guy here, what I would agree with Teri-Lee on the buzzword piece, right? And I think the industry in general gets tied up, right? So if you look back, 20 years ago, when DHS was formed, there was some pretty advanced acquisitions going on around requirements, large scale infrastructure, IT procurements going on, focused on just requirements, not you need to use this, I want you to do it this way. And those were actually pretty impressive at the time. There was, advanced web development for the user experience at the airports for TSA. And so it was very much involved with that. At the same time, there were other things going on called utility-based computing, right? Which is, hey, host your data somewhere else, use what you need when you need it, and you can scale. And so, I think to your point around the language, which is why I think it's most important, is that, I think the technology industry gets hung up in the marketing hype around something that is probably already been there, but how to use. And I think what I love most about how you're approaching things and the UX to the CX, I do believe that that's where we need to go, because there is so much technology out there to support what we want to do. It is, what do we want to do? How do we want to do it is kind of the next thought, versus we're going to use, right, X to do Y. It's no, we want to do Y. How does X support it? And so I think that evolution is happening, and I think that's why this conversation is so important, because I do believe, to your point, that the CX aspect, again, having just done passports, yeah, you only see the, as the user, you see the interaction with going on the website. You have the interaction with, ours were expired. They expired during the pandemic, going back to the office with, a new picture, et cetera. We have teenagers that needed them. And then it just kind of, disappears, and you have no real understanding of what's going on. It's just the frustration of, oh crap, if we're going to travel soon, we need to get these done. And so that customer experience is end to end, even though your user experience may only be, tied into a small piece. So we've got a Sandy Barsky. See, I'm hearing that the issues are the same as before, and that the task is continuously educate. So how do we do that? I'll actually throw that to both of you, because Teri-Lee, I think that's actually one of the conversations we had when you were a guest. So
Here
Charlotte,
we go.
You want to start with that one?
Yeah, I'm dead on, right? Spot on, as they say. It definitely is education. I was, and not just in what we're talking about, because like my favorite buzzword, I think we're coming past it a little bit, is DevSecOps. And so, right? And so when people are talking DevSecOps, you have people talking the technology that can support it, not necessarily the culture change that needs to start way before we even deploy any of the technologies. And so there's the education there. I would also say that there's the education and expectations. And what, Chris, you were just talking about, like with the passport office. I was going to share a similar experience with the DMV during the pandemic, which was, I didn't know you had to make an appointment to go to the DMV to update. I think it was like my address or whatever at the time. I got there and I was nicely told that I need to go back home and make an appointment, which I did. And I was in and out of there in no time. And once I knew the expectation, so the education piece of it, then made my appointment, I was in there, I had everything I needed, and I was out, and the experience was that much better. And so it absolutely is the education piece. I think where the education piece continues to be a mystery is educating at the right levels. And we talked about leadership earlier, having that, the leaders that are championing things, but they have to know what they're championing, and they have to know what they're asking of either the contractor or the team that's overseeing the contract. So education piece, I think, is going to continue to grow. I will say with the virtual environment, I do think we can get on technology faster to have those conversations. And that's what we encourage on our side, because it's still getting lost in, the email trails that we suffer with. But those tools have helped with the education and just getting in front of the leaders at a different level. But that's my take on it. Charlotte, did you have anything to add on that one?
Yeah, so I think this question draws out the quintessential thing about CX, right? Which is that CX and IT modernization is about getting customers, right? Or citizens or the public or your users to do what you want them to do, right? Like that's the whole point. When the IRS doesn't want you to call them because it's like $14 a minute or something, how do you get these people to stop calling you? Well, you could do a better job on your internet system, right? And then you modernize, right? So there's like these objectives that you can have as a customer experience person. Like it could be a win-win. How about that, right? Like it's not zero sum if we can target the right things. So I just think that there's something largely misunderstood and scary about CX-based IT modernization, and that is just the front work. So like, in order to do that, it's just the empathy of it all. Like it's the vision of it all, right? Like, how do you visualize that experience, and that leadership gap comes from the lack of like encouragement maybe we've had in the past for new ideas in government, which like could seem so cliche, but just welcoming that technology change for other countries means for them human centricity. We need to follow suit or else we will get behind. And that speaks for every and a good example of that is in Mexico, in one of the other curation sessions I'm working on, they have a Ministry of Culture. We don't have a Ministry of Culture, right? So, and what does the Ministry of Culture do, right? They look at marginalized but important things like design in society. And they say like, where can we incubate design thinking? How do we incubate that? So there's that example in other countries. And then there's this other example, for example, in Scandinavian countries, in Finland, they just passed legislation that says you are allowed to prototype policy in the region. So instead of rolling out this big bang of like, healthcare, universal healthcare, they're going to say like, why don't you try that in your municipality or your city and let us know how it goes, and then report back, and you're allowed to do that. You can make small incremental changes where it matters, meet your customers where they are, and if it works, let us know, right? And so there's these really big macro design-centered, human-centered changes happening in the way other countries are modernizing their systems and processes. And it comes down to individual projects doing that. It's not, we're never going to have a savior who's, a random person 4 years in office do that for us. It's going to be all of us, our community, just deciding that's the norm. What is the purpose of this contract? What effect will it have for the citizens' experience or the public's experience? Rather than like, what components do we want to change into what widget, right? So I just beg of everyone to just spread that, right? Like, let's think bigger.
One of your things to that, though, that you talked about is, I think it was leveraging the information architecture. Was that, I'm thinking kind of our conversation when you go into an organization, leveraging that architecture was something that you talked about. I mean,
yes,
I think that is, I got to imagine, a gap that you see a lot of time.
Yeah, I don't know why people are so scared of old-fashioned Visio. Like, like you've got to know your map and terrain. And so I cannot believe the number of projects like 6 years, 10 years, 3 years into the thing. I'm like, can I have a process map or a system map? They don't have it. And whatever they do have is outdated and not updated, right? So I'm just like, how do you know where you're going if you don't know where you came from? And I'm made like 90% of my projects first month is spent doing as is system mapping, just good old fashioned, like user has an idea. Okay. Like user sends email and then I arrow down Outlook, user submits form, arrows down this system, user submits this system and this database. Like, what are the user's behaviors and what are the systems in place behind it? And it seems really simple, but it is so powerful because that's how we did it in Congress too, right? Like, what are all the ways an idea becomes a bill? And what are all the systems? There's like 29 of them. Where do we start? This portion right here, like this tiny sliver. Then what? So then map the as is before the to be.
So is that something you suggest that be done prior to RFPs and statements of work as part of the overarching? Hey, we're going to look at the CX. We're going to map out the as is and some areas that we'd like to see change. Is that ultimately one of the recommendations that you have?
Absolutely. If I have feds on the call right now, it is, first of all, you do a journey map of the whole experience, and there might be many. You do a user persona, right? And I don't mean vague user personas, right? I mean specific, right? Like, 29-year-old recent graduate versus like, parent of or whatever, right? Very specific user personas, because that is innovation. Knowing your users is everything. Facebook, like whatever, Instagram, the whole warfare is that they know our citizens better than we know our citizens. Do you know your customers? Strong user personas, walk them through the whole thing, do the journey map, right? Like how did this person get to this benefit form, right? Whole experience, good and ugly, and have your entire leadership as part of that. Then we say, what is the most painful thing? Or what is the most approachable thing? What is the thing that what's the low hanging fruit? Then you can strategize the fun stuff, right? Like then you strategize, then you do that particular process. So which is, let's say, benefit submission forms, right? This is so painful. Lots of people drop out at this point. What can we do? Then you do that systems mapping I was talking about. Well, user logs on. Okay, how long does that take? And then user like submits this thing to login.gov, and then if they retrieve their password and then mess here, and then when they do that, then they go on to the next thing. So then you map out these things in hierarchy, and all of a sudden you have a roadmap, and that is the roadmap to roadmaps. Like.
So I think that leads into Sandy's next question here nicely. So Sandy, give me a second here and I'll walk through it. But Charlie, as a PMP, does proper program project plan call for a change management plan? Going back to Teri-Lee said about DevSecOps, has the change management planning been missing in most program and project planning? And then the follow-up in the end, the change is about process and process flows to better meet mission, not technology, other than technology enabling the changes. So I guess from a PMP standpoint, we talked a lot about a number of different aspects here, but I guess, is there a change management plan that goes in?
Absolutely. Didn't we start with that? Yeah, no, change management is everything. I would encourage new graduates to be 50-50 on like engineering versus change management. If you don't understand concepts of change management, you have no business doing modernization, right? Like I don't even see that many job descriptions out there for change management. We do not need to throw more developers at program, like at struggling things. What's that rule? There's that rule about like, if you add more developers, the problem doesn't go away, it increases exponentially because one person would make a mistake, right? So like constantly adding more engineering to an IT modernization process is not it. You can have fewer developers, fewer build time if you have better change management, right? Like, because so much of the effort is based on like the incorrect requirements, or like, you know, changes of staff, hostile requirements, people, right? Like there's all sorts of things that we were talking about earlier that hinder modernization, and has everything to do with managing change and less to do with the technology, the vast technology we have out there. We can use whatever we want. There is infinite technology. We don't have change management people though. Like I think it should be 50-50. Like the way I take my coffee, with 50% cream and 50% coffee.
We'll get that mix at the end. You got to save that for the audience. So then in the world of like kind of the follow up, the process and process flows. Is that part of the change management? Is that part of the overarching? How do you see that fitting in?
People hate the word and love the word. Just like adore the word strategy. Like that's also a language thing. We need to like really figure out what we mean here, folks, right? Like, what do you mean strategy? That is strategy, right? Like is abstractions, what came before, what will come before or after that, right? Like, and like, is that going to affect other thing, which is systems thinking, right? Like, how are we gonna, like, what else does it impact, right? So, I mean, just in large, there just has to be a focus on getting leadership to strategize. Right. Like I think there's a fear, and that's maybe what I'm looking for. It's like there is a fear of real strategy in government, like as if that it's like and maybe later on you might think about this and say like, what was Charlotte even talking about? But like if you start looking at the problem with the words strategy and how it gets used, which is like which requirements do we do first at the micro level, or like which contractor should be hired, that's not strategy. Strategy is bigger, more overarching, more visionary, and how to get to that vision. And there's this weird way we've set up our bureaucracy where we have these politicals and the SESs layer, like the thin layer of SESs who might be able to do that strategy over a long period of time. And then there's like the 15s and the 14s who are just holding up for, you know, like, and it's just that strategy layer is like meshed between that, right? Like, and then it gets flipped. Like, it's like the roller coaster thing, like the Lara Croft ride at King's Dominion, where like it just keeps flipping and there is no strategy. Like, there is no strategy. Like,
no,
does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. And I think this was like part of the discussion earlier is like, there's a fear, I think, from a leadership perspective to fail. If you set a strategy and you fail on your way, you're going to feel like a failure, you know, and nobody wants to put themselves in that position. I think that's the culture piece that we have to flip, right? Is set the strategy, and then we're all going to be at least trying to get that roadmap together, have the vision, and come together behind that strategy versus not having it and not coming together. And I think that's where we're at right now. And I think it's okay to say it, you know, but I totally makes sense to me.
So I like to use a term strategy execution, because I do think back to the opening statement, which is why I wanted to talk about it then, is the language, right? I mean, I think strategy assumes it's something that we create as this, pie in the sky idea, and then go set it on the shelf and then go do what we need to do tactically, right? Versus the strategy execution is, what do we develop as that vision to execute against, right? And I think that's the key, because I do think to your point, which is one I love and will continue to harp on, is the language is what gets us kind of stuck. And so, I do believe that taking that time to develop the strategy, although Teri-Lee, I think we talked about this when you were a guest, was, you get stuck also in the budget cycle, right? And so it's the developing that strategy quick enough to hit the budget cycle at the right point to then be able to get the procurement out at the right level. And oh, by the way, you're probably now still 18 to 24 months down the path of where you're trying to go. So I think it is a challenge to get from point A to point B at times.
Yeah, and I think that if when we talk about breaking down the scope, I believe that these are all the puzzle pieces that need to come together and to get us to that next point. And then just talking about strategy, I just had this conversation with my team the other day, so I feel like but it was, you know, having to define it, but we started at like the basics of it, which is like, you know, what are we saying when we say we need to set a strategy, when we need to set a vision? I don't want a vision statement. I don't want a marketing material, but what does that look like, right? And having the conversation. And when I first asked, like, well, when you say you want a strategy or you say you want a vision, what are you asking for? Silence. And I think that's where we have to get to, is at a simple level. So I'd like to just bring it back, and I know we're coming up on time, but you know, when you talk about identifying the customer or even the end user, right? When we talk about those things, that's even a holdup. That simplicity of saying like who the customer is, right? Like that's tough.
Yeah. There's nothing more that government needs more than to know the customer. And it feels so upsetting because you know, there's all of these contracts out there, there's all these projects out there doing all these things, and you go in and you realize they've been working on these very dud personas. If you go on your Facebook page right now and you go to my profile and then you look at all the things that Facebook knows about you, right? The government does not know those things about you, but they do, right? And it's this warfare of user personas. And I always have this pyramid that I show in my trainings, but it's like, at first you just know them. And then, you know, then you like empathize and give them what they want. And then you can do when you can put in what you want them to do, right? And they are so far up that hierarchy and we are not. And the most important thing about CX is that the measure of CX is trust, right? And it's recommending the, you know, the key, oh my God, my mind, but it's trust, right? So like, and it's like, net NP, the net promoter value. So it's trust, and will this person recommend this to another person, right? And right now we're seeing through the government how hard it's been to get people to trust what we're doing and getting citizens to come in, do the things that we need them to. And it is everything on mission success of IT modernization. Who cares if your thing is so beautiful and on the latest thing if nobody wants it because nobody trusts it and you don't give them any reason to, because you don't know them and you're giving them stuff they don't want. And, you know, like, and that is the crux of this vicious cycle. Just know who they are. And when you know who they are, care about how they will act. And then one day when you need them to do something for you, they will, right? But we constantly violate that trust with government and services and citizens by being unpredictable or, you know, disparate or, you know, inconsistent across the board. Like those are the things that deteriorate trust in public services. And I'd love to see all of us kind of seek that. Like, did this activity increase trust in us? And that would be success for all of us.
I'm going to hit you with just so we get Sandy, because Sandy's been pumping questions.
Hi, Sandy.
So the last one, and then we'll probably hit the time. Is there a CX guidance on privacy, safety, and security?
You know what? There isn't. I'm trying really hard to get cyber people on board, right? Like, I've been working, you know, like we have close friends like John Creighton, who's at CISA, who's working on it. I know he has a big vision for, you know, like the way that CX is going to influence, you know, compliance over there. And there's a lot there, but it's just so little. And if everyone could see that CX is the thing that will reunite, you know, the IT and the cyber and the data and like, you know, business, like it would be easier. But no, I don't think there is, but I could be wrong. I will look for it.
I'll give you, as somebody that has done cyber, I think the challenge is around, again, the language and the approach, right? So if you talk compliance, your mind automatically thinks audit, right? If you think audit, you're thinking this is bad. Okay, let me just, you know, check the box and put it away. I do think that there is a need for the CX to focus on the impact, right, and the living aspect of what it is, right, and I think that is is key, because I do think that there's a lot of cyber that the CX would actually help solve. And so, so Sandy, I think while there isn't necessarily guidance, I do think there are a lot of us out there that are trying to vocalize a different view to it.
If you'd like to work on something with us, let me know. I'd love to. Trust, zero trust, CX, trust, bad user experience getting hacked. So, you know, like.
Right, exactly. That's a bad CX. That's a bad CX too.
That's bad CX. If your information gets, yeah.
Well, so we've hit the top of the hour. Real quick, your coffee of choice and your little mixture there is.
Today is a French press with a Cinnabon creamer, and that's disgusting, I know, but it's so good.
All right, well, thank you, Charlotte. This was great, and congratulations on your next phase of your career. I think folks, Charlotte did a little bit of a announcement on LinkedIn, so you can check that out. And thank you all for joining. Teri-Lee, thank you as always, and Kirsten, thank you for all the help.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Charlotte. This has been Energy. Who needs coffee when we have this to look forward to, right?
Great conversation. Everybody check out our upcoming Cloud and Coffee for season 2. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.